Hey, hi all. Welcome to another edition of the Acid Left Beyond Linguistics Reading Group. I'm Mike Watson, your host. I'm here with co-host Adam Ray Adkins, and we have with us Chris, Ian, One Dime, and Ernesto. So I'm just going to quickly pass on to you. I think you all probably know me by now, or a lot of the viewers. I'm a writer and theorist. Chris, tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, sure. I'm Chris. I'm in Louisiana right now. Right now in the middle of kind of hosting a post-capitalist desire reading group that just recently came together. And we're working through the supporting syllabus, doing the actual readings, trying to kind of recreate that classroom experience up through the first 5 lectures that he actually got to do, and then beyond that, trying to collectively kind of try our best to recreate the path that he was building towards an acid communism at Goldsmiths. So that's the hope. Then I also have a page that I just started called Oscillating Futures, kind of exploring the links between futurism, the synthesizer, electronic music, and radical politics.
Okay, that sounds good. The reading group looks great, so we'll probably be involved in that. Is that beginning in a couple of days, no? Tomorrow?
Yeah, that's our first session. We kind of did an intro to set the tone and decide how we were going about it. So our official first session is 2 days from now.
Yeah, so that's the first, but then the second session is going to be after this comes out on our YouTube. So the second session is going to be the 24th of April.
I think it's the 25th. Yeah, because it's the 11th for the first session. Today's the 9th, I believe. We do Sundays bi-monthly.
Okay, yeah, okay, great. Okay, Ian.
Hi, guys. I'm Ian from the YouTube channel Epoch Philosophy. I personally just a undergrad student, almost done. Thank God. But yeah, I make YouTube videos about theory and philosophy, maybe some little bit of cultural commentary, cultural theory here and there. Yeah, I really like Mark Fisher quite a bit. I like you guys. You guys do pretty cool stuff. Yeah, so just glad to be here.
Great, yeah, good to hear. Thank you. Adam, you may as well introduce yourself. I think we know you.
Yes, you probably know me. Of Earth, Adam Ray Adkins. I make mixed media art, write surreal poetry, and talk about cultural stuff beyond my ability. Thank you.
Okay, he's very good at that as well. Yeah. Okay, so Ernesto.
Sure. Hello, I'm Ernesto Vargas. I'm a psychoanalyst from Mexico, and I host a reading group called Zero Books Capital Comrades on Facebook. Right now, we're reading through some texts from foundational texts of Chinese Marxism, but we'll eventually go back to Western Marxism if you want to join us then.
Okay, great. One Dime.
My name's Tony. I'm from the channel One Dime. I make leftist propaganda where I bridge stuff with cultural topics with a bit of theory to kind of, shed light on a lot of issues, give a nice in-depth analysis that can be interesting for people who like, intellectual theory, but also accessible for people outside of it, like stuff you can share with your grandma. And I've been a reader of Mark Fisher for a while and a participant in the past Acid Left reading groups. So yeah, happy to be here.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So basically, when we do this, what we call the Beyond Linguistics Reading Group, we make memes which reflect our reading experience, and then we talk about the memes, and we talk about the theories that led to those memes, and we often kind of work in some contemporary or current events. So this book's a good one. I think it's a little bit easier than the Ghost of My Life book that we read last time. Also by Fisher, because it's written as a book. Even though it is distinct essays, it kind of has a flow, perhaps more than Ghost of My Life. But having said that, there are a number of terms that get introduced and a number of people that get introduced that aren't really developed, or let's just say that Fisher assumes knowledge on the part of the reader. here. I would say more than in capitalist realism, possibly more than in a lot of Ghosts of My Life, because he introduced a lot of obscure stuff there in the Ghosts of My Life book, which is actually a compendium of essays from K-Punk and from various magazines. He introduces obscure stuff, but he kind of like introduces it. He kind of like breaks it down so you get to learn about stuff. Here in The Weird and the Eerie, I kind of a couple of times didn't quite know what he was getting at, because I it's been like 20 years literally since I read the Uncanny essay by Freud. So what I'm going to do first is ask Ernesto, who just said he's a psychoanalyst, to talk a little bit about those terms, the uncanny and the other kind of Lacanian and Freudian references that come up in the very beginning of the book. And that can kind of just get us prepared so we can move on with a firm foundation. So Ernesto, do you want to show us some memes while we do this?
Sure. Yeah. Go for it. Yeah. I actually took the text for my memes from the essay, from Freud's essay. Felt it was appropriate, especially since that's the whole topic, right? So a brief outline of where we are, because what we need to understand when we are trying to parse some sort of understanding of Freudian theory is that Freud is, he's developing the psychoanalytic theories. He's the first one to do it, right? So a lot of he's going to posit something and he's going to work with that for a while, and then he's going to experiment, right, with his patients and so on, and he realizes, okay, this is not good. So where are we right now? The Uncanny is an essay that was published at the same time as when Freud was writing Beyond the Pleasure Principle, right? At this point, Freud is contesting with the fact that not everything can be explained through, just sexual libido, right? Just straight up sexual libido, right? Which is one of the big criticisms that Freud has. Of course, if you read Freud, you understand that he, doesn't just talk about that, right? But you can definitely charge him with not going beyond that for a long while on his work, right? And when we're approaching the Uncanny, this is where he starts to tease with what lies beyond the pleasure principle, right? And what lies beyond the pleasure principle, and the reason why Lacan is brought up in The Weird and the Eerie, is the death drive, right? And so this is probably something that has to be explained over a long while, but we'll try to keep it as brief as possible, because thankfully Fisher and Freud both give a lot of examples that make it very easy to kind of tease out by ourselves, by our own experience of the content, which I think one of the problems here with Fisher is that he, makes a lot of very obscure references. But, putting that besides us, I'm going to go first to read this meme. It says, doubt as to whether an apparently animate object really is alive, and conversely, whether a lifeless object might not perhaps be animate, right? So that's those are some vegetable automata that you can, wind up. And this is a quote that Freud picks up from E. Jentsch, right? He's quoting him, and Fisher even at one point in the book he talks about citing, right? So whatever. So Jentsch is talking about this very superficial affect that the eerie, the uncanny, the unheimlich has, right? And to be clear, I want to something that I think Fisher should have probably picked up from Freud is the clarification as to the different translations of uncanny, right? Freud says, here I'm quoting from his essay, that the English words that can be used to replace unheimlich are uncomfortable, uneasy, gloomy, dismal, uncanny, right? Ghastly, as in, and of a house, haunted, of a person, a repulsive fellow, right? And in Spanish, because I wanted to draw from Spanish also, he says sospechoso, so, suspicious, right? De mal augurio, so, a bad augur, right? Lúgubre, which is like spooky, and sinister, siniestro, right? So I wanted to bring all of those words because to save some time and not give hours of theory explanation, I think those words kind of draw on the feelings that Freud is talking about, right? And so Fisher says that Freud concludes that the main point of uncanniness for Freud, was castration anxiety. And that's true. He says that castration anxiety is in fact the final resting point of the subject's libido, right? But what we have to understand here is that for Freud, this castration anxiety, and after he revises his work and so on, it's a symptom, right? It's a symptom of a kind of a psychological dynamic that goes on, and this psychological dynamic is what Lacan eventually uses with his. I'm sure if you guys like theory videos, you've probably seen the big diagram of desire that Lacan works with, right? He uses that to finally, try to understand that castration is not something to be taken literally, but rather it is the feeling that comes from what Freud, through the uncanny, explores as this primitive animism, right? This idea that there is an us, and if you can, Mike, can you switch to the next meme, because that's what I wanted to eventually move to. So this idea that there is an us beyond us, right, to which we owe ourselves to, right, and that in some way guarantees us a sort of transcendental existence, right? Here, sorry? No? Okay. So here, again, I'm going to quote Freud now, this time. It says, the existence of such an authority, which can treat the rest of the ego as an object, the fact that, in other words, man is capable of self-observation, makes it possible to imbue the old idea of the double with a new content and attribute a number of features to it, right? So it's not about, whether you're going to have your penis cut off or not, right? That's not the whole point. The point is, why is there someone who wants to cut off your penis, right? Why are you imagining that there is another spirit, outside, which you are projecting, right, to, in this case, in the case of the meme, to the Lakitu, right, which in some way guarantees authority and order, right? Why are you creating this, and why are you imbuing all of this with your sexual energy, because it is energy that is either sexualized or sublimated? Why are we doing this, right? And that's the kind of draw that that's the kind of situation that the uncanny kind of puts us against, right? And Freud, what he does in his essay, and if you guys pick up the Penguin version of the uncanny, it has another 3 or 4 writings by Freud, which kind of draw on his theoretical explorations of different concepts. Because, I wouldn't want to get into this right now because we would just kill so much time, but Freud works with screen memories, which is this idea that the memories we have of our past are in fact agglomerations of some significant but secondary event in our past, and some significant or primary event in our closer past, which turn into a misshapen memory, right? And those memories haunt us. But again, I don't want to go into all of this because that's a whole other essay. But the Penguin edition adds this because you have to kind of work that into the understanding of the uncanny, right? So it's not that Freud didn't work with this, but that there's a lot to work with, right? There's too much. So if we can move on to the third meme, so I can conclude my short intervention. So it's an Among Us meme, right? Why not? So here, Freud is talking about the kind of an effect of the uncanny, right? He says the impression changes if these two events of no consequence in themselves come close together, So one encounters and here, I put the little Among Us crewmate, but here he's talking about the number 63, right? He's talking about, just a number, right? Several times in one day, right? Because again, this opens the door, and Fisher, has this great an entire section of the book dedicated to doors, right? But this opens the door to the idea that this self-conception of ourselves is more significant than the daily drudgery, right? And in the uncanny essay, Freud even goes far enough to say that people who are anti-animists, right, they just simply don't experience the uncanny, right? Because there is no spirit to haunt them. But anyway, I guess that's enough. What do you guys think? Should we move on to the other memes?
This
Yeah,
feels like
Looks
a
like we lost
very,
3 people. Oh no!
Everyone's speaking at one
Okay.
one second. That was bizarre.
Okay.
Just to clarify a couple of things. So you're saying that the repetition of an event, the kind of over familiarity of a event or symbol, that is what Freud calls the uncanny. So in this case, he's talking about the number 63. That for somebody reappears. For this case, in this case he's talking about the number 63. I think you said,
Yeah,
that reappears
Yeah.
many times.
Yeah.
So it's the repetition of this that somehow appears kind of weird, and that we maybe give too much attention to that, and then that can be kind of disturbing or scary somehow.
Mhm.
That's kind of what you were saying. But if I get it right, in the introduction to The Weird and the Eerie, Fisher is saying that the uncanny is not exhaustive of all the kind of strange experiences one can have. It's just one thing, and we need to add to that the categories of the weird and the eerie. So he's kind of saying these are kind of something a little bit different to the uncanny. And then he kind of describes what the weird is, and he describes what the eerie is. But I didn't really get the difference. They seem quite close. I know that I think Fisher made this quite clear, but I just didn't get it. Did anyone get the difference between the weird and the eerie?
Yeah. I think he has like a direct quote where he says, "The weird is constituted by presence, the presence of that which does not belong, whereas the eerie is constituted by a failure of absence of the failure of presence." It's like a sensation of the eerie occurs either when there is something present when there should be nothing, or when there is nothing present when there should be something. I find examples of the weird a little bit easier, but the eerie, I think the easiest example is the eerie is probably empty houses or empty towns where there's an absence of human presence or absence of something. Or I think you could find a good example in a lot of horror video games. But like, yeah, that's what I get. It's really absence and presence are what differentiate them.
I get a visual of like Half-Life 2. It's like where there should be, I don't know if you guys have played that, but where there should be objects and certain things, and there's oddly enough relating to sort of a Fisher-like thing, even though this isn't intentional. But people have made video essays on like certain video game engines and the sort of atmosphere that they posit from that. It reminds me a lot of this, and I can't think of a better game that does this than like Half-Life 2. I recently replayed it, and it just kind of fits that perfectly.
Yeah,
there's a video essay about it too.
I find games kind of eerie anyhow in that sense. Playing a game on your own can be kind of eerie because there's nothing really there. You get that kind of feeling of it's just this kind of skin or empty engine that you're interacting with. I suppose it's like you get that feeling partly because maybe you're playing very late at night. If you're playing very late at night at home, maybe they could kind of creep in this eerie sensation after playing for a long time because you're actually interacting effectively with something that isn't there. I wanted to ask something else, and that is why is Fisher talking about the weird and the eerie? It's kind of one question I've had. I mean, I suppose they're interesting just because they're kind of spooky, and that's kind of interesting somehow. but how does it fit in with capitalist realism, for example, which would be the book that people know the best? Because I don't really see, although I'm going to kind of contradict this a bit later, but I don't really see a strong political current running through the first half, because we read the whole of the half that's on the sensation of the weird. Does anyone have any kind of idea there why Fisher is doing this? How this fits in with his wider corpus?
I might have a good bit here. If we're talking about empty spaces that were once occupied by humans and aren't anymore, you could talk about post-industrialist Detroit, white flight in that city after the automotive industry collapsed in that city. And, folding this back into how Mark ties music into politics, that was the birth of Detroit techno and the rave, which, kind of resonated in UK through drum and bass, kind of a different genre. But you could definitely draw like a kind of salvage punk mentality of walking through these ruins and like with a futurist mentality and finding new ways to organize people or gather people together and feel some kind of solidarity despite the flight of all the capital flowing through a city. Yeah, that was a thought I had.
I think even further, like I see something that's kind of common is there's at least like in an early theorist sort of writing career, I noticed sort of a pattern where in the beginning there's sort of like an external focus around systems and that doesn't necessarily change, right, with Fisher. But I noticed that like throughout time, a lot of theorists end up sort of focusing on like kind of weird subjectivity and like sort of sublime like feelings beyond the original, like I don't know, exterior analysis of like capitalism and stuff like that. I get that a lot with Mark Fisher, where he talks about a lot of like Ghosts of My Life. That was a pretty big I want to say leap in sort of difference from capitalist realism, where he started focusing more on like an art subjectivity sort of point of view.
I think there's two ways to kind of analyze it with his discography, I guess, because I see the Weird and the Eerie is more similar to K-punk a little bit, and a little bit like kind of like Ghosts of My Life, but except there's not so much of a political current, at least not an overt one. But I do think it's worth considering Mark Fisher's own mindset here, because this came out, I think, a year before he died. Or might have came out after he died, but he was writing it, I think, a year before he sadly committed suicide. And I think there was a lot of he was just in a dark mindset. And I think him naturally being a very smart theorist, I guess, gravitated to something he was probably was already interested. But I feel like there is something very haunting about the Weird and the Eerie. And maybe his personal life simply had a big factor to play in why he sort of decided to make this. Because I don't really see the connection so much from capitalist realism. I see it more of the blogger Mark Fisher.
So I think that there's a connection to be made to capitalism, but by knowing the eventuality of the promised communism. What this focuses on is strange subjectivities, like was said earlier, and those subjectivities of the outside, which is something outside of capitalist realism ultimately, which you start seeing in acid communism. So it hasn't been directly political. I think that's true, but if we tie in, the subjectivity that capitalist realism creates, or that is really, you kind of see it. You can put it in light with that. So it's more of like a psychological look at something. But if you know like his work, you can kind of see that how it could be used for that kind of thing. The strange, because it's he specifies it's not horror. It's strangeness as such. Strangeness can be horrific, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. It's just unsettling, and it makes you reimagine what is possible. And ultimately, you're going to have to reimagine the economic structures as well.
Yeah, and you could leap off of that, like, talking about the outside. I think the kind of accelerationist argument that there is no outside, and if you relate that to what you're talking about in the weird, drawing something from the outside into where you are, rather than launching the subject into the outside, being completely immersed in it.
Yeah, he does say.
Do you guys mind if I read a quote from Fisher from the book? Yeah,
Go for it.
Yeah, he says, the outside is not empirically exterior, it is transcendentally exterior. It is not just a matter of something being distant in space and time, but of something which is beyond our ordinary experience and conception of space and time itself. Throughout his work, Freud repeatedly stressed that the unconscious knows neither negation nor time. Hence, the Escaresque image in Civilization and its discontents of the unconscious as a realm in which nothing that has once come into existence will have passed away, and all the earlier phases of development continue to exist alongside the latest ones. So this made me think, what the question, why capitalist realism, right? Made me think that the capitalist realism mode of thinking is very much dominated by this kind of phenomenon, right? Of making immortal kind of the things that happen outside of us, and kind of keeping them within us and haunting us. I don't know, what do you guys think?
No, that's right.
He has a quote somewhere where he says capital is by its nature a very weird and a very eerie entity. Although I'm a bit confused about what he means by that, because he doesn't really elaborate very much, but it does seem like a current which I did see in a lot of the early accelerationist writings, like Nick Land, for instance. Like a bit of that meltdown essay in Fang Noumena from Nick Land has like a kind of weird theory fiction-esque description of capital, but I don't quite get it. When he talks about capital, does he talk about it in a Marxian sense, or is he talking about it in a much more broader sense, including perhaps things like cultural capital, social capital, whatnot? Yeah, that's just a question I have.
Well, he's talking about objectification a lot, commodification in capitalist realism. So I suppose that does kind of link in with this thing of the weird being something that's there that shouldn't be there, and the eerie being something that isn't there that should be. I guess that's what capitalism does. It gives a sense or a spirit to things that have no spirit. That is kind of the commodity fetish, and then it kind of disappears things that should be there. It kind of takes away your life and your own time as you become slave to capital, for example. So I guess that in itself does explain how the weird and the eerie might fit in with his kind of critique of capitalism. But okay, we have this meme here. Do you want to just describe this one time, or tell us what you did?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I didn't expect to transition of my memes right away, but yeah. So throughout this, like the first half of this book, he gives a wide variety of examples, which of the weird, which I wasn't quite familiar with. I knew of David Lynch and Mulholland Drive, but a lot of I haven't read H.P. Lovecraft or H.G. Wells. I would like to, but I decided, why not come with what I thought the descriptions of the weird and the eerie could be. So I think the movie Spirited Away, and also even more so the movie Paprika, I would say two absolute masterpieces of like just anime movies that are like classics. Paprika is I'm sure everybody knows Spirited Away by Miyazaki, but Paprika is directed by Satoshi Kon, who's kind of notoriously like the dark version of Miyazaki in many ways. And I guess you could say, if I would describe Stanley Kubrick of anime movies. And yeah, there's just a lot of things that is you could describe aspects of the film that are both weird and eerie, but primarily weird. There's just, for example, I would say you can probably guess why, anyone who's seen Spirited Away, why there's aspects of the weird in that there's things that just don't make sense. There's witches that turn into dragons. There's you know, humans that become pigs and devolve into these like monsters, and there's something very inhuman about the place the main character finds herself in. It's just really bizarre. It's not scary by any means. It's in many ways really I don't know, I would say a positive film in a weird way, but there is something weird about it for sure. Paprika, for those who haven't seen, I would go see that if you just want to be really confused. But Paprika is essentially, the plot is they can kind of go inside people's dreams and analyze people's dreams. And the dreams are, I would say, the way they depict dreams are more accurate to how we experience dreams, at least the ones we can remember, which, you know, dreams often don't make any sense at all. They switch from scene to scene, have all these things that make absolutely no sense. And Paprika is really messes with your mind in that way, because there's things that just, there's the laws of the laws of physics do not apply in the dreams whatsoever. Nothing makes sense at all. And just when you see in scenes in this movie, when you think they're not in a dream, and like it's just a depiction of a real normal scene, it switches on you, and you realize, oh, there's something out of place. And then the next meme, which is kind of supposed to be juxtaposed with this one, which is the Eerie. Well, an example of the Eerie is some little nice photoshopping there. Is Monster. For people who haven't seen that, that's another incredible anime series, which is incredible in many ways because it's nothing about it is like science fiction or fantasy. It takes place in a real setting. It's basically essentially the plot is, there's a doctor who gets falsely accused of murder, but he's trying to go after the person who's the real murderer, but you never really know who he is. And he's a guy named Johann Liebert. You find out anyway. This guy on the left side. And probably the most terrifying villain in anything I've ever seen, by far. And what's terrifying is that he's, in many ways, he's just a human. He's just a regular human. There's nothing supernatural. But throughout the series, it does allude to whether he actually is human, or there's, even though everything is quote unquote real in that show, it really makes you question whether there is something supernatural about it. And there's something eerie in many scenes, because in many scenes there's empty places where he's looking for this the villain. There's many empty houses, many empty cities they go looking, and the music, which people have seen this show will know, is the music also adds to the eeriness when you think that there's something there but there isn't anything there. And then sometimes you think, then there'll be scenes where there's an absence of anything scary or whatever, but then it pops up. So in my opinion, it's hard to really find examples of something that's strictly eerie, at least for me, that I've like really enjoyed. Especially, I would say Monster is a masterpiece. And my example anyway.
I wanted to comment about the Paprika, because I think you're right that Paprika is a really good example. And just to say that in Ghost of My Life, he criticizes Inception for being its depiction of the dream world as un-Freudian, as, you know, the subconscious and kind of commercialized. Whereas in Paprika, you do seem to get an actual unconscious dream world that morphs and is very unsettling, because once it's realized, it's incorporated, and so it takes that moment of weirdness and outsideness and changes subjectivities very nicely.
Yeah, and there's the Satoshi Kon had studied Freud up to, you know, writing that film. And it shows, because I would say it is much more accurate, because you see sort of manifestations of subconscious desires, feelings, but in very, very strange ways. I mean there's no logic there's no physics that apply into the dreams. There is all kind of very just weird things that you don't think belong, things that make absolutely no sense. I think you can get a sense of exactly just how weird, and I guess the Fisher sense, the word this film is just by watching looking at the title. I mean, sorry, watching the trailer. If you watch the trailer, you'll see very quick just what I mean. But better yet, go watch the film.
Yeah, I think you could like say a lot about, like, at least for my favorite horror, most of it is very atmospheric. So you would call that more eerie, right? It's not focused so much on the monster. It teases the monster for a long time. So it you know, kind of pushes the eerie at you first and builds up to the weird, where, you know, the monster is something that shouldn't be there that is eventually. And the atmosphere of an atmospheric horror film is something that isn't there that should be. Yeah, I don't know. At least the first part of that works for me. I'm not sure about the eerie part, but
and one last thing I'd add is I guess what differentiates us from horror or, you know, terror or whatnot is precisely why I use Monster as eerie. It's not a horror movie or a horror series. It's not something that is just made deliberately to terrify you or not. But there is something. I mean, it's hard to find words to describe. I would probably normally use the word uncanny, maybe, or but I guess I think eerie is a good way to describe it, because despite being totally real, there is something in there which is like an absence of, I guess, humanity and the villain, or wherever you feel is, where you think you feel his presence. There's something missing that is eerie, and in many of the just settings when the main character is looking for him, which is a big part of the plot, there's a lot of eeriness just to all the small towns he finds himself in, and there's I guess a lot of good character development of the people you meet in the small towns, and then yeah, I can't emphasize that show enough. It's really good.
Okay, just to keep it moving, there's a thumbnail here. Basically, this is a thumbnail to the show you're watching now, if you're watching this. Although I think I would have tweaked this a bit as a thumbnail by the time you see this on YouTube, but this was the original, the draft of the thumbnail. So I think I'll show this because normally we don't really get to talk about, you know, the thumbnail. Sometimes the thumbnails are kind of memes in themselves, or, you know, kind of work in themselves as a visual we can discuss. So it's basically it's just the Doomer Wojak guy and the trad girl, not for any particular reason, but I mean they just kind of worked here as figures to use, and I kind of made them all kind of weird. With the girl has like a squid coming out of her head, and he has like a crab arm, and she has like a crane, like an industrial crane, as her right arm. So I'm not entirely sure what I'm saying here. It says it just looks kind of like weird, but it has also this doorway here. So this is why I'm mostly showing this, because the doorway relates to one of the essays in The Weird and the Eerie. So basically Fisher talks about an H.G. Wells short story called The Door in the Wall, which features the narrator Redmond and his friend Lionel Wallace. And basically it's a story of how this Redmond, he knew this Lionel guy, and this Lionel guy was walking through London. I forget now, it's 1700s or 1800s, but he, as a kid, he remembers walking through London and finding a door in a wall that led to a garden that was kind of, you know, a weird space with kind of unusual people. And then when he went through the garden, he found a book, and the book was, I don't know, somehow also weird. But then the book had at some point a picture of him by the same doorway he'd gone through, but unable to enter the doorway. And then I don't remember exactly how this pans out, or even I got that exactly right. But there was this kind of this thing where this guy, for the rest of his life, remembering this doorway, he kept wanting to return to it and get back to that garden, which has some kind of like really good vibe in it, and the people in the garden had this kind of really good vibe. So it's like he has this childhood memory of this door that he went through into this garden that he can never get back into, ever since that point when he saw in the book himself outside the very garden he was in, unable to re-enter. And then walking through London at several points in his life, he sees the doorway and he thinks to enter, but I think he doesn't. And then eventually this guy is found dead because he's looking, well, it looks like what's happened is he's been looking for a doorway, and he thinks he's kind of finding it, and he ends up falling down, I think, onto some building site or something and dying. I don't know the exact story, but one imagines he was looking, because Marcus Fisher is paraphrasing this, so I'm trying to get it right from his kind of
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. He falls onto a building site, and the kind of feeling is between the lines that he was looking to get into this garden, and perhaps it never existed. It's kind of what Ernesto was talking to earlier, like this screen memory or whatever you called it. Maybe this guy's never actually been in this garden, but he has a fixated memory of this other world that exists as a portal between our world and perhaps a better world, or a more majestic or strange world, it's kind of magical world. And it kind of is a metaphor for how kind of an aspect of psychosis or mental illness is a kind of being stuck between our world and an imagined other world. And this has got into at the end of the essay where Fisher quotes the story itself, where he quotes a woman who had loved him greatly, so loved this character who ended up dying looking for this doorway that possibly doesn't exist. A woman who loved him greatly describes him. Suddenly, she said, the interest goes out of him. He forgets you. He doesn't care a rap for you under his very nose. So she's describing, and I think from a photograph, she's looking at this look of this guy who suddenly disappears into his own world. And that's because, as Fisher is suggesting, he's trapped between our reality and another one. And Fisher talks about the weird as being very much a suggestion of an other, perhaps better, in any case, very different reality that exists at the edge of ours, and upon which we're always on the verge of entering somehow or possessing somehow. So I think that's kind of true in many respects, that we are all chasing a potential transcendental reality that we never quite reach. So I thought that was kind of quite powerful, and also describes the experience, I think, of melancholy, but also of psychosis is one of yearning after this other reality that is suggested, that we feel we could kind of trip into or walk into, or maybe accidentally find ourselves in at any one moment. And presumably, a lot of psychotic people who are delusional do kind of cross over into another reality. But the problem that they experience is, I suppose, living on the cusp of that reality. So you're between this and that reality. But I think it says a lot about the way, about everything, madness, but also sanity, or if there is such thing as sanity. But also just the way our society functions is one of reaching out to a better world that will never actually exist. And then where it doesn't ever exist, we end up kind of throwing our toys out of the pram. This is how maybe conflicts start, or how societies that are to all intents pursuing a utopia end up actually doing the exact opposite, creating some kind of hell, with gulags and whatever, Nazi death camps or whatever. Because there is just this great disjunction between what one really wants, the reality that one really wants to be in, that is suggested always, and the one we're forced to constantly kind of fall back upon, that is our own dull reality in which, dreams don't really manifest. So I think, in that there is a kind of politics that, even though Fisher isn't speaking explicitly about politics here, this kind of gap between our reality and this suggested perhaps better reality has a lot to answer for. I mean, it's how capitalism functions, really, because it's like, you want this new shirt or toothpaste or whatever because it's going to make you something better or something better happen, and then it never really manifests because it's always just an object. So yeah, those are just thoughts I had. I don't know if anyone else wants to say anything.
I think you're very right. Freud makes it a very important point of his reading, that what he wants us to the conclusion he wants us to draw is pretty much the same one you're drawing, Mike. That there's a pull, right, from beyond us, but that pull isn't actually outside, right? It's ourselves who are self-deluding, right? And I think when you point it out to video games, that's hitting the nail in the head, right? Because video games are capitalism's way of capturing this feeling and selling it to us, right? Because there is no failed animism in a video game. You play and there are spirits, right? There are programs, there are scripts running, and there are hunts, right? People look for glitches and bugs, right? In video games all the time. They look for, I guess the directors or the programmers, I guess, what's the esoteric message? You know what I mean? And I think one of the better games for this was Nier Automata, right? Which I don't know if you guys found out that about a couple of months ago, one final glitch was discovered, right? And it was just something that the author programmed for fun, and people are chasing it, right? Which is, Freud always makes this point, right? This isn't about making value judgments, right? It's just about recognizing what we're doing and recognizing ourselves in our activity, which is I think a Hegelian point, right?
Yeah. Thank you for confirming a lot of that, or at least that reflects Freud and what Fisher was talking about in the beginning of the book. But I want to move on from that. He also talked about The Fall, the English punk band that became effectively post-punk because they just they lasted forever. So he said a number of things about The Fall. One interesting thing, looking them up, is that they were called The Fall after the singer wanted to call them the Outsiders. So it was from the Camus novel that they were called The Fall. So they were going to be called The Outsiders, and of course Camus had a novel called The Outsiders, but then were named instead The Fall after this other Camus novel. So just a quick fact there. So basically, The Fall had this kind of grotesque and kind of weird aesthetic, shall we say, that a lot of their songs involve storytelling, kind of folkic type kind of storytelling, and there was one in particular that was interesting that Fish was talking about called The North Will Rise Again, and it was about a figure, I forget, it is a story, it's a fake story about a mythical, well, obviously mythical because it's a fake story. It was a story about a fictional character who starts a revolution in the north of England, and that's why it's called The North Will Rise Again. And there's this refrain, The North Will Rise Again, like that line keeps repeating over and over. And right now, I think I feel I should be able to say more about The Fall, but they're not a band I really followed a lot. But I did find this song, and I made a little meme from it because it's very current, because there's a political party just been formed recently in England called the Northern Independence Party, which is actually running against Labour in a by-election, and I think the election is in early May. So I basically made this, which I need to put over here. Okay, so that's the singer Marquis Smith. Okay, so that is basically Thelma Walker, who's running legally as an independent because they just didn't get their paperwork approved in time. So the party is not really running, but she's running backed by the party. And it's an interesting party. They actually call themselves Democratic Socialists, which no one ever has done in England, to my mind, because Labour Party are effectively Social Democrats, which is slightly more centrist, I think. And Yeah, they've just become really big. They got like 50,000 followers on Twitter in just a few days, and they're looking at polling only about 2%. But they are threatening Labour because they're much more left than Labour. And if they start fielding people across the north of England, which lost a lot of seats to the Tories in 2019, they might actually lead Labour to lose even more seats. And this is why they're radical, or why their potential is radical, because they could actually force Labour leftwards again, so back towards a kind of Corbynite policy. So, I mean, it sounds kind of, to have a Northern Independence Party sounds kind of pretty right-wing and destructive. They actually want to kind of set up the North as a country in its own right. This area we would call Northumbria, just south of Scotland. But you know, actually, if you look at what they would most likely achieve, which would be to just make Labour go back to the left, they are really a good thing. And even if they did make the North independent, if they did it with their policy offering, I think that in itself would be a good thing. I have nothing against devolution of power to regions, especially, you know, if it's to a left party. And yeah, that's pretty much it. But I thought that's also another way that this book has a kind of political undercurrent, at least, because there is a kind of talk about how the North itself is considered weird. The weirdness of the fall is partly because they're playing on Northern tropes, and they do that deliberately because they're from the North, and they're challenging this thing you have in England where the North is considered to be inferior to the South. And you have this in like any country I've spent time in, like in Italy, you have the South being inferior to the North, but you know, it depends on which country you're in. But you know, the poorer industrial area is often the one that's subjugated by the richer area, which has more kind of, you know, capitalists in it, in the real sense of, you know, people who own industry. So yeah, I mean, the thing of weirdness is it's often something ascribed by a power group, by people in power who, you know, they'll say the people not in power are weird. And then you get this thing, you know, where a whole lot of religions and belief systems are seen as weird from the perspective of the powerful, which really means, basically, from most of our perspective, as Westerners, but I won't call it, I don't know, I call us all Westerners. I don't know how you class South America, but it's not quite in the same frame as America and Britain. But or it's not culpable for as much shit as America and Britain. So I won't put Ernesto in that bracket. But yeah, no worries. But you know, from our point of view, just virtually any religion is freaking weird apart from Christianity. But if you look at Christianity, it's also very bloody odd. But it's just our perception that the whole world gets to look odd to us Westerners because we're the ones effectively who hold the power. So I think that is hinted at in that essay, even if it's not kind of said explicitly. But you know, in relation more to the north and south of England than global politics and culture. But yeah, that's basically my show and tell.
You know, I immediately took note of that too. That phrase, "the North will rise again," and especially seeing it put in context. It's strange to me, Mike, because like you were saying, in a lot of places, the North is kind of like the center of power, and the South is the place that's been exploited. And you know, in North America, but even in the United States as well, growing up in the South, I heard the phrase "the South will rise again" all the time, which has this very, you know, racist connotation to it, etc. So just hearing the phrase, to me, "the North will rise again," like has this very weird feeling of kind of making me feel almost for a split second that I'm in some kind of alternative timeline, you know, like where the South won. And
yeah, I have to say actually that where there are whippets, this kind of dog that you saw in here, and there's this type of hat, which are things that are associated with the North. And then later on you have the sausage roll. Well, these are actually memes by the people, so thank you whoever made these memes. So like you take the sausage roll or you take the blue pill, so that's kind of a joke. They eat a lot of sausage rolls. But where you have the whippet and the hat, I could be seen as on very dodgy ground there because I'm from the South, which I didn't explain, but I guess it's probably apparent. But it could look like I'm making fun of Northerners. It's not really my place to use whippets or these kind of hats in memes. And actually, I have to say that it's them that they've reclaimed these symbols in their memes, and they've done very well from these memes. So I'm only doing what the Northern Independence Party itself is doing, just so I get myself off the hook there. We actually had like an acid communist on our acid left Facebook just go completely crazy at me. Should I say crazy? It's not really fair. He got very angry at me for making a Northern Independence Party acid left meme, and I won't even say his name, but he'll probably watch this at some point, or he may do. But he actually is a Northerner, and he's like, what's all this shit? And I thought, shit, I don't really have much of a leg to stand on because I'm from the South. But on the other hand, I did remember that I was only using kind of associations that they themselves were using. So I think that's kind of okay. I mean, I hope so. This cultural appropriation is so loaded today that I might be cancelled now. But
from across the pond, that all went completely over my head. I was looking at it, and then I was like, I do not understand this. I just didn't have the context to get it. So that it's good to know a little bit more about that. You helped me a little bit there. The Fall too is another band that I don't think I had ever heard, and then going and listening to them because of this, they have a very like magical, realist, kind of H.P. Lovecraft feel to them, and I could see how they kind of probably inspired a lot of indie rock that I came to like later.
Yeah, I like the kind of folkish, but when I say folkish, I don't mean like the right wing folkish, but kind of like the storytelling kind of folkish aspect to them. They've got some great sessions they did on the Robert Peel. No, Robert Peel. Is it Robert Peel?
I don't know if it's Robert, but I know the Peel sessions.
Yeah. I don't think it is Robert Peel. I think that's the guy who started the Police. I mean, not the band. They started like literally the police force. Somebody else Peel. Damn. Anyway, yes, the Peel sessions. They have some brilliant Peel sessions that are worth looking at. Okay, so before I make any more gaffes, anyone else have any memes? Oh, Adam has some memes.
I do, yeah.
John Peel.
Okay. Oh yeah, okay. So this is my first one. The quote here is from Fisher. A weird object or entity is so strange that it makes us think that it should not exist. But by the very fact that it does exist means that it is us who are wrong, and that all of the personal rules that we have previously used to make sense of the world are mistaken. And then, I've been thinking a lot about, the lockdowns and the face mask and all of that, and the way that a virus itself can kind of seem like a weird object. The virus seems like a weird object because it challenges our understanding of, the lives that we've been doing. Of course, outbreaks have happened, but, this current and latest one, we've reacted to it differently and probably ever before, at least in the last 100 years or so. And it's challenging the way that we think of the world. It challenges human and nature interactions. It challenges that we've constantly expanded into natural habits, interrupted ecosystem, and caused or played a part of mutations that happen. Like if you read like the epidemiologist and virologist about this stuff, this is where these mutations come from, increasing interactions of the human world and, places that might not be part of it. But it also calls into question that separateness that we have from the world. We are not outside of the world in reality. But, subjectively, we think of ourselves that way, and we kind of build ourselves and perpetuate those ideas. And then it got me thinking about the face mask in and of itself. I live in a place that doesn't take anything very seriously. And, even we do have face ordinances and people don't enforce them or on, and it affected the way I think about stuff and interact with people. You know, I don't know what it will be like in the future. I don't know if I'll fully regain that subjectivity and consciousness that I had before. I think of how strange it is to see someone's mouth. You know, because now if I see someone's mouth out in public, at the coffee I work at or the grocery store or whatever, you know, it's instantly an intrusion because that mouth should be covered. But a year or 2 years ago, if I were to be transported into this world, the mask would seem like the weird object. You know, like if you were just put here, you might think of seeing everyone wearing a mask, you would question the rules that you've been living by. You would question what is reality. You know, it would seem so strange. But now that we're in this predicament, it's almost the opposite, where it's to see someone without the mask is kind of strange. And I think it's going to be strange, like even weirder in the future when we actually get back to something like that, or if it persists. You know, and you are seeing memes where people imagine it's the year 20 and you find a face mask in your jacket pocket, think back, you know. So it's like already being projected in the future that this is going to stick around and stay affecting consciousness in some form.
Mm-hmm. You know, Adam, I think it's very telling of reactionary mindsets that they are very resistant to this kind of self-criticism.
Yeah, it creates kind of a weird paradox too, because at the same time, like the virus kind of rips the veil off the idea of individualism in, you know, Western society. At the same time, you have this mask covering, which, you know, body language is what, I don't remember the exact number, but it's the majority of how we interpret what someone's really saying. And with your face covered, that becomes very obscured. So that, you know, there's no ocularity there. So that's made the social very weird.
Yeah, I have something to add to this actually too, because I do think there, like, a big reason why people don't like masks is kind of our sense of individuality, especially in the Western world. And I think you can take, in a way, like a Hegelian dialectic approach, or like, because, okay, we need kind of, no, we don't need it, but we're used to having sort of a reflection to validate our existence. And it kind of gives us a self-consciousness. And obviously, you still have that with a mask, but with a mask, you're hiding a big part of your face and your identity. So when you have when you're talking, I've noticed this tendency is when people will be wearing masks, they'll actually take off their masks as they're talking, even if they're close to people. It's almost like an instinct. I saw this clip of Obama when someone like shouted something at him and he was wearing a mask and he took off his mask to yell something. And like he was kind of close. And I was actually, so I was hanging out with some friends and a lot of people weren't wearing masks, but me and this other person were. And I'm pretty cautious, but I've noticed myself, what's weird is when I was talking, I had the tendency of almost like taking off my mask as well. It's like you want someone to see you when you're talking. It's like a reflection, or else you feel like a ghost, like you don't exist. Mm-hmm. And I do think it does have to do with some kind of, you know, individualism, because I don't think it's really a universal cultural thing. Because I went to Japan last year, and that was before COVID. And in Japan, a lot of people on the metro were wearing masks before COVID. It was like a normal thing. People just didn't care. So I wonder how much it does have to do with the kind of individuality, and masks are just weird for us because they kind of obfuscate that.
Sounds like dialectics.
Yeah.
You're right though too, because like mask wearing has been known to us in the West and the US for a long time, and it was almost seen as like a joke of Asian cultures, which, you know, definitely has some racist elements to it as well. But you'd be like, man, how could you live in Tokyo? Sure, they got a lot of stuff, but there's so many people, they have to wear masks just to walk around. So like I think there is some kind of resistance to the average person wanting to wear it because of that. But I also find it interesting, the talk about reflection and stuff, and wanting to be seen too, because like, the eye is central for humans, and we're not covering the eyes. The eyes are in fact even more accentuated with the mask. It seems you're actually looking there instead of looking at someone's mouth. And the mouth is kind of an animal feature, like animals, like, they're just shoving things into their mouth. It's their primary drive, I think Hegel says. And so that's interesting, because it's almost like being brought to a more human world. You kind of have a recoil back to wishing for animality again, or the Western subject does anyways. And then this is my other one. And the quote here is again from Fisher. It says, "We could go so far as to say that it is the human condition to be grotesque, since the human animal is the one that does not fit in, the freak of nature who is capable of recombining nature's products into hideous new forms." And so Fisher talks about the grotesque in the book as a subset of the weird. And his talking about it actually made me think and like reflect on this stuff, is that I love grotesque. The grotesque is my favorite form of the weird, I think. A lot of body horror and stuff like that. And I made this background image out of just 3 pictures I had saved up my phone. I had no clue what I was going to do. I've had them for quite some time, 2 of them at least. One's a little bit more recent. I just saw them and thought, oh, I got to have them. And saved fascination with the weirdness and grotesqueness of them. And they're pictures of mannequins that are mostly disheveled, even these it's the way that they're positioned that they seem like they're tired. Like a mannequin being tired to me is something that is grotesque. It's funny and it's weird and off-putting that a mannequin could even be tired to the point that it would collapse. Then the prominent one in the foreground is a fashion model who's doing, I don't know. The fashion world is hilarious. I don't know. You see the stuff that people use on these runways of like the super high fashion, and it's the most impractical stuff. And particularly fascinated me because of the mouthpiece the guy's wearing. I've had a lot of dental work done in my life, and it looks to me like he's wearing one of those that stretches out so that the dentist can get in there. And that as a fashion piece would be the most uncomfortable, grotesque thing. But that's exactly what fashion is. It's like kind of suffering for an aesthetic purpose that is beyond yourself.
Suffering for the swag.
Yeah, really. What is fashion beyond that? Like if it doesn't have an element of that, I don't know. It's probably not it. And then up at the top is some women in bodysuits wearing Lego heads. They're kind of suggestively erotically posed. But it's a completely unerotic image at the same time because they have gigantic Lego heads. So they are both object and animal and sexual attraction all at the same time, which is funny and grotesque. It's very off-putting while being hilarious. I found, when I read that quote, I thought, oh, I think I'm gonna use one of those images I've saved, and I just ended up combining all 3 of them together to try to form that of what the grotesque is, or what I think Mark's getting at there, because it also is recombining of natural forms, even standing outside of nature, doubles back and like kind of about commodities that we're making use of it. And some of it's great, don't get me wrong. Obviously, combining nature into new forms also includes houses and washing machines, etc., labor-saving devices. But it gets to the point where you have all of these things, these grotesque things.
Yeah, he was talking about the grotesque coming from the grottos, some grottos that were dug up in Rome, and these mosaics they found of animals combined with building structures and plants. So you'd have like an animal supporting, being the column supporting a roof, within this kind of drawing or image in this mosaic. And that's interesting, given that there's this possibility that COVID came from animals coming too close to humans, animals that would have been like in the forest, but the forest had been felled. So then they come into human contact and the humans weren't used to these germs. So it produces this kind of adverse reaction in us. So that's kind of interesting and topical, no? That's kind of a form of the grotesque that they were talking about. This apparently being the most perverse thing about these mosaics, that you would have like these animals, combined with building, with quite advanced building, representations of quite advanced building, because Romans obviously were very good at building. So it's almost modernism meeting animals.
Yeah, and vegetables and people kind of all morphed together. In and out. It actually reminds me of the movie. If anyone has anyone seen Society, by Brian Usna?
Isn't that the body horror movie?
Yes.
I haven't seen it, but I know the one you're talking about.
It's wonderful, and in it, class is presented as this weird, grotesque entity, and it is, full of drippy, slimy puppets with body parts coming out of places they should be, and it's much about class being grotesque and kind of like parodical on world.
That's perfect, actually, because I think yesterday night, one Republican representative of the the United States said this great thing. He said that it was time to stop having partisan fighting, and instead that they should kind of coalesce, right? That the parties, so they should coalesce around their common interests, right? And what are the common interests of bourgeoisie, right? Yeah, it's perfect.
That's the truth.
Yeah,
Okay, I think we can probably come to a close. Did we do everyone's memes that we have here?
Yeah, I apologize again. I didn't. I wasn't able to make any.
Oh, no worries. We don't always have memes from everyone.
Do you
fine.
have any final thoughts you want to say, Ian?
Not really. Honestly, I think we kind of summed up some of the subtextual things that would probably be important to talk about regarding the weird and the eerie. No, yeah, I see a lot of overlap between a lot of sort of the eerie and the weird seems to be sort of like I think it reminds me a little bit of like commentary on the sublime as well.
It is, definitely.
Yeah, and and like beyond that, like it also reminds me a lot, like I think a good way to visualize what Fisher's talking about, to go back to the beginning, what we were initially talking about, because I still think that something like the weird and the eerie, the concept might be a little weird, kind of like Uncanny Valley, right? And you look at what is it, like the new like robots that look human, but they're not, and I find that seems like a fitting visualization. But other than that, that was one thing I was going to point out, but I didn't quite get to.
Okay, and anyone else wanna wrap up with something?
I have like one movie scene I'd like to reference in kind of relation to that talk about the grotesque, and that's Aronofsky's The Fountain. There's a scene where he gets to the Tree of Life, and he has this like dagger type artifact thing that he found, and he's using it to stab the tree to drink the sap that's supposed to be the fountain of life. But when he does this, like so he walks into the garden with these wounds from, fighting the indigenous people to get there basically as a Spaniard. So you have that context of empire there a little bit. But anyway, when he stabs this tree and drinks this nectar or whatever, flowers and grass and all this beautiful like natural imagery starts to sprout from all of his wounds, and eventually it overtakes him and swallows him up, and he becomes part of that garden again. So I kind of loop that into the grotesque as, that distinction between humanism and animism, where humanism often seeks to subject nature to its will, and animism sees nature as, more of a system that it's a part of, this systematized thing. So I think The Fountain really points at that really well. I love that movie. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, I wanted to point out finally to Ian that Freud actually makes the distinction between the uncanny and the sublime.
Ooh, okay.
He mentions that the sublime is this experience, right, where you're kind of exalted, so on and so on, and the uncanny, he says, unlike Burke's sublime, is a paradoxical mark of modernity, because he says that that there is a kind of a uncertainty, right? And the sublime is a confirmation, right? A totalization, right? And instead, the uncanny is the same kind of experience, but in the opposite direction, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. That makes perfect sense. I feel like that's a good thing to distinguish if you're going to write about the uncanny. Makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I have one thing to add, and it's sort of more or less a question kind of directed to what you, Ernesto, were talking about earlier at the start of this discussion. And it relates to it anyway, is that how much does the weird and the eerie, how can that relate to the Lacanian real? Because I sort of see a weird similarity in that, like, the real is essentially what, in a way, it kind of is the antithesis to the symbolic and imaginary. And it's kind of what happens when the real is only encountered when the symbolic and imaginary sort of dissipate or fracture. And you see, like, the real sort of haunts you. It's like in a way, a little black hole. In what way could that really be bridged with the weird and the eerie? Is there an element of the real in the weird and the eerie?
That's a good question.
My reading is that the real as a dimension. How do you call it in English? The registers, right?
The register, yeah.
Yeah. So the real as a register, kind of, I feel like it sets the stage for the uncanny experience, right? Because, as Freud argues again that someone without an animistic kind of a perspective will not experience uncanniness, right? And to me, it makes sense that of course you need the real, right? But without the interjections of either the imaginary or the symbolic, you can't have the uncanny experience, right? But it has to be against the backdrop of the real, right? It can't be just an imaginary relation or a symbolic, right, structural relation. It has to kind of have friction, right?
Okay.
I hope.
All right. So that's been brilliant. Thank you, everyone. Yeah. So some great points. We'll be carrying on in a couple of weeks. Until then, stay safe. Stay left. Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. See you guys.
Bye.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.
Yeah, thanks
So-
for having me.